Henry VIII already has the highest kill count amongst English kings when it comes to murdering wives. 2! He killed 2 of them! But did you know that he almost did it a 3rd time? This guy is unbelievable. But who was it? Who was the 3rd queen at risk of the executioner's block? Don't forget to subscribe. Okay, so it's not Anne Boleyn or Catherine Howard, because those are the 2 queens he did execute. Not Jane Seymour either. She died after giving Henry the son that he'd so desperately craved for so long. What then of his first wife, Catherine of Aragon? You have to wonder if he thought about it. So difficult, so hard fought it was in annulling their marriage. But there's no chance that Henry would have risked irrevocably offending her powerful nephew, the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. Anne of Cleves then? Well, there was absolutely no need. She accepted a divorce when it was offered to her, along with a palace in Richmond to call her own. So that leaves Catherine Parr. Yes, the wife who survived according to that famous rhyme, survived in more ways than one. But to understand why Henry VIII got apoplectic and thought about lopping off her head, we need to understand a little bit more about who Catherine Parr really is. So there are 2 things we need to know from the outset. One is that Henry VIII wasn't Catherine Parr's only husband. Catherine married 4 times, making her the most married queen consort of England. And Henry, he was husband number 3. The other is that after those first 2 marriages, Catherine, a religious reformer now in her 30s, doesn't need to marry again. She's wealthy enough to survive on her own, and she certainly doesn't seek out becoming the Queen of England. The problem is, when Henry VIII comes calling asking for your hand in marriage, you can't say no. But Catherine, she's crafty. She uses that situation where she finds herself as the Queen of England to her own advantage. Here's historian Elizabeth Norton to tell us more of that story.
Catherine is a very reluctant queen, but when she becomes queen, she embraces the opportunity that this affords her. And one of this is in her writing. She is the first English woman to publish a book under her own name, which I think is an achievement that really should be shouted from the rooftops. She publishes in 1545 her Prayers or Meditations, which is a religious work. She must have achieved Henry's permission to publish it, which means that it is not as radical as I suspect she wanted to be. It's quite conventional in its tone. You really have to sort of read between the lines to spot any reformist faith. She doesn't make any appeals to the saints, and that's quite interesting because, of course, a traditional religion, you very much would appeal to the saints. So the fact that they're omitted, I think we can see reformist beliefs. But she has to be very careful. Henry VIII is actually quite proud of the fact that she's written this book. It certainly allows her to publish it.
Now, it's a little surprised that Henry allows her to publish it, because it's in this book that Catherine compares Henry to Moses fighting against the Egyptian pharaohs. One can only imagine what his ego is doing at this point.
Henry VIII, of course, owns a copy. In fact, his daughter Elizabeth will later translate the book into several languages and present it to Henry as a New Year's gift. So he clearly approves of this book. It's interesting in itself because it shows this woman writing this book for herself. She's thinking about religion, but it's certainly not her most radical of works, and she will save that to be published after Henry's death.
That book, which is called The Lamentation of a Sinner, is her most famous work, and crucially, it's only published in the year after Henry VIII dies.
It's very inwardly reflective. In quite broad terms, she speaks about her conversion, the personal relationship she has with God, because that is a real feature of 16th century Protestantism. It is the fact that you have this personal relationship, you're reading the scriptures. It's not mediated through the ceremonies of the church. And she sort of abases herself. She calls herself a sinner. She's not worthy. She also talks about the fact that she would give up everything she has, all her jewels, her dresses, to bring one person over to the true church. I mean, I suspect she wouldn't, in that Catherine loves her clothing. Her accounts are full of very rich fabrics. But again, it demonstrates just how inwardly her piety is. She's clearly really, really thinking about religion. And she wants to convert people. She wants to tell her story. It's an evangelical text. She must have written this during Henry VIII's reign, or substantially so, because it's published not long after his death. But it's certainly not a book that he would ever give permission for her to publish. And actually, it's quite dangerous that she had the manuscript at all during his lifetime.
So that could have got Catherine into quite a lot of trouble. The thing is, Henry VIII never learned about the manuscript. He never found out about the existence of the Lamentation of a Sinner. Nonetheless, at this point, Catherine is treading on quite dangerous ground. Here's historian Tracy Borman to explain why.
Catherine's about as extreme as you can get along the path of reform. She's an evangelical. She has this circle of like-minded ladies at court, and they're meeting regularly and discussing quite radical religious ideas. And that's why she's seen as such a threat to the likes of Stephen Gardiner, Bishop of Winchester, his partner in crime, Thomas Howard, Duke of Norfolk, both very dyed-in-the-wool Catholic conservatives. They really don't like this new queen. She stands for everything that they are bitterly opposed to. I mean, they're justified in thinking that because everyone knows by now how influenced Henry can be by the women in his life, particularly his wives.
The problem that Catherine and Henry have is that they're not quite aligned on matters of religion. She is much more reformist than he is. And where she starts to become unstuck is that she starts debating points of theology with Henry.
Catherine seems to have viewed her queenship as God's will. You know, when she says God withstood my will, she seems to think she has a higher purpose, and it may be that she thinks that's to convert Henry VIII. And there's an account written not long after Catherine's death that talks about she got into the habit of debating with him while he was ill in bed, and she'd be challenging his religious beliefs. And one day she leaves the room and he turns to the people with him and says, massively paraphrasing, but sort of complains that he's being taught by his wife in his old age and how women have become such doctresses. Stephen Gardiner, Risley, the Lord Chancellor, use this as a way to try to bring Catherine down. They persuade Henry to draw up an arrest warrant for her for heresy. She almost certainly is guilty of heresy. She's been probably involved with Anne Askew, who is a Lincolnshire woman who is thrown out of her house and then goes south preaching the gospel. And she's been arrested and actually tortured in the Tower of London by the Lord Chancellor, who actually turned to rack himself to try to get information on her connections with Catherine and some of the ladies of court. She doesn't give much away, but there's a clear connection with Catherine and her household. And Anne's actually then burned at the stake. It's a very odd plot against Catherine. The arrest warrant is drawn up, but it's then dropped outside the door of her chambers. Catherine becomes hysterical when she reads this document, as you can imagine.
Now, Henry hears Catherine crying after reading this arrest warrant. Of course she's crying. She knows what's happened to some of her predecessors. She knows how this could go. Henry sends his physician to go check on Catherine, and that physician tells her, you've got to go to the king, you've got to make your case, you've got to talk, as if your life depends on it. Because you know what? It really does.
It was so close. It was so close. It came within a whisker. I mean, we can compare it to other historical events like the gunpowder plot failing because there was a tip-off. Well, Catherine heard very last minute about the plot against her, about the intention to arrest her for heresy. And she was able to throw herself on Henry's mercy, to play an absolute blinder. I mean, she plays the submissive wife down to a T. She's had years of practice. And so she convinces Henry, I was only doing this for you. I thought you'd welcome the debate. I wanted to kind of distract you from the physical pain you're in by sort of trying to learn, but really I need to learn from you. You're the master. Henry then feels good about himself, but it'd been perilously easy to get one over on Henry, for his enemies to persuade him that here's another wife who's about to betray him.
He doesn't tell Risley that he's made up with Catherine, and he and Catherine are then walking in the gardens the next day, and Risley arrives with some soldiers to arrest her. Henry then starts kicking Risley and calling him a knave, and Catherine very sweetly tries to intercede for Risley, saying, well, I don't know how he's offended you, but please don't do that. Only for Henry to say, if you knew what he'd done, you wouldn't say that. So it's such a weird incident, and I think we can't take it fully at face value. I mean, if Henry had wanted to execute Catherine, he very easily could have done. It looks very much like a test for her, or attempt to put her back into her place.
And that is why Henry VIII thought about having a third wife beheaded. Now, Catherine Parr, we remember her as the wife who survived, but really, she is the wife who thrived. There is so much more to her story after Henry VIII, and you can learn more about that with Elizabeth Norton in this video podcast. And to hear more from Tracy Borman on Catherine Parr, check out our 6 Wives podcast series over in the members area at historyextra.com. But before you do that, like and subscribe.